Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rukhsana Rahman from the Department of Women's Studies, Guwahati University. I will be speaking on disruption of traditional gender roles during displacement and peace building. This is a lecture which focuses particularly on how traditional gender roles are disrupted during displacement and during the period of peace building. In the introduction, before examining how traditional gender roles are disrupted during conflict-induced displacement, a review of some basic concepts when discussing gender and gender roles should prove useful. Gender usually refers to the social differences and relations between men and women which are learned and transformed. The term gender does not replace the term sex, which refers exclusively to biological differences between men and women. The gender roles. It defines what is considered appropriate for men and women within the society, social roles, and also division of labor. It also involves the relation to power, how power is used by whom, and how it is shared. It also varies greatly from one culture to another and change over time. It also varies from one social group to another within the same culture. Race, class, religion, ethnicity, economic circumstances, and age influence gender roles. Sudden crises like war or famine can radically and rapidly change gender roles. Oxfam and the ABAAD, Resource Center for Gender Equality, conducted a gender situation and vulnerability assessment among Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees from Syria now living in Lebanon in 2013. Their research findings changes in gendered norms, values, and identities clearly indicates how conflict and displacement traditional gender roles. I quote, "Patterns of mobility and lifestyles have changed, and in part as a result of this, both women and men have been forced to redefine core aspects of their identities, as well as losing their traditional role as breadwinner. Men seeking jobs and services also often face threats and discrimination from some members of host communities. Many women reported feeling that they have lost their femininity as, in addition to caring for their families, they now have to support them by going to the market, running errands, making decisions, and working in paid informal employment. However, for some other women, this has created an increased sense of empowerment. In almost all societies, specific gender roles of men and women are clearly defined by society. In this framework, women are generally assumed to be soft, docile, weak, and their space is considered to be in the private sphere. This exclusion of women from the public sphere made them oblivious of their potential, that they could also become equal partners of their male counterparts is inconceivable. Society has long ignored the potential of women in peace building, preferring to see them as victims and in need of protection. But the fact of the matter is that women are a crucial resource in conflict resolution and significant contributors to the peace-building processes. This fact has only recently been acknowledged and was given the importance due to in the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 passed in the year 2000, which calls upon all states to ensure women's full participation and representation in peace processes and peace negotiations. Unfortunately, little has been done to implement the resolution. However, where it has been implemented, it has begun to have an impact, as for example Rwanda, where a qualitative improvement in the government approach to peace can be seen. I quote, "Stereotypical images of women as passive victims of war overshadow their agency and contributions to peace building and belie the complex reality of women's experiences in conflict situations." Women are victims, but they are also fighters. Women are survivors, but they are protectors. Women are also peace builders. At times of war and conflict, when routine life is severely disrupted and violence is a reality of everyday life, governments alone cannot sustain peace. At this time, women play an important role. They are the ones who can articulate the need for peace in their communities, since they understand only too well the price to be paid for war. They are the ones who are most impacted by the conflict. They are rendered homeless, their husbands are killed or go missing, their children barely survive. They have a profound personal commitment and a vested interest in peace, in building peace and reconciliation. When social order and rule of law break down, it is women who suffer most. When men and teenage boys go off to war, women become the heads of households and must provide food, income and security for remaining family members. Women are subject to gender-based violence used deliberately as an instrument of war and often suffer from deep psychosocial trauma. Even after the cessation of conflict, when soldiers come home, they are suffering from deep trauma and alienation. They take out their frustrations on those in the house, the women and the children. It is indeed an irony that those who are so affected by wars and conflicts are the ones who are excluded from peace talks and peace-building efforts. But even though usually excluded from the official talks and negotiations, women are active informally in their own communities, working for reconciliation and peace, active in peace marches and reconciliation efforts across conflict lines. Examples across the world are evident in Nigeria, in Kashmir, in Afghanistan. These places have had women organize in the face of threats and danger for peace efforts, for better facilities for their children in war-torn or conflict-ridden areas, for medical facilities and medical care for expecting mothers. Perceiving them as victims only overlooks a huge chance to use their energies for recovery and transformation. Lee H. Hamilton, director of the Woodrow Wilson Center, pointed out to the position of women as victims of deadly conflict, but also the role that women play in conflict prevention, management, and resolution. He said that, I quote, "It is the one of the great tragedies of the modern world and of the ancient world as well, that women and girls are often the most adversely affected victims of the violent conflict, targets for abuse, refugees, inhabitants of shattered communities and states. But time and again women have demonstrated their resilience in overcoming despair and building peace," unquote. Gender stereotypes and specific definitions of masculinity and femininity are often promoted during conflict. Men are exhorted to defend the nation, quote unquote, and women are called upon to support the war by tending the home fires. Their roles as mothers are lauded, as they are called upon to send their sons to war. Women have often drawn moral authority from their role as mothers to become active in peace movements and join women's organizations opposing the war. This involvement, though not an obvious reversal of roles, does in fact actually work against warmongering. Gender relations and roles are subjected to stress and change during and after conflicts, especially in situations of displacement, where families are forced to live in camps for extended periods of time. The traditional division of labor within a family is no longer predictable, where the man went out to work and the women looked after the home. More often than not, the men were engaged in fighting or had been killed. Women had to become responsible for the family, and this necessity changed the way women were traditionally seen. The woman was forced to leave the shelter of her home to fend for herself and for her family. This reversal of gender roles brought to fore qualities that women were not traditionally associated with. These are strength, resilience, energetic action, vigor, dynamism, and drive. From being passive and subjugated, she became powerful. The flip side to this gender reversal also has to be noted. Jan Hall Lute, Executive Vice President of the United Nations Foundations and Consulting Director of the Conflict Prevention Project at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, commented, I quote, "Women play often unacknowledged but vital roles in sustaining security. Women, despite their common image as victims, take care of their children, of their families, and of their communities, especially during wartime. Women are very active on their own behalf in terms of self-preservation. Women are often the stabilizing force in the societies in which they exist. This is certainly true in post-conflict settings where women represent essentially the backbone of reconstruction and rehabilitation and the reintegration of former combatants and the re-emergence of basic economic activity in a society, in a war-torn society, once a peace has been achieved. Now let us discuss about the disruption of traditional gender roles and its positive effects on women. It has been found that conflict affects gender relations and roles. Women's exposure to conflict often increases their engagement in economic, social, and political spheres. With women's increased participation in the public sphere, one can expect a positive effect of conflict on women. This increased economic independence, greater confidence, and self-esteem may help to empower women and increase their bargaining power within the household. If these kinds of changes in a woman's life can be sustained, then perhaps conflict can also provide a way to transform social structure and promote gender equality. Household welfare. Women's changing role as the primary breadwinner of the household due to conflict can have two positive effects. Firstly, the participation of women in the labor market as the primary breadwinner of a conflict-affected household can recover the economic losses of the household. Secondly, economic empowerment of women may lead to improved investment in children's education, health, and food consumption, which can bring overall positive effect for the welfare of the family. An outstanding example is that of Kashmir, in a region cursed by prolonged conflict in which an estimated 45,000 people have lost their lives. Kashmir still sees no signs of resolution of conflict and the return of peace. In the clash between the militants and the security forces, the lives of ordinary inhabitants of Kashmir have become a veritable hell.
We are losing our loved ones. हम क्यों ना करें ये? हमारा हक है। हम लोगों ने भी पत्थर उठाया, हम लोग को मजबूर कर दिया था। हम लोग में पत्थर वरना हम लोग स्टूल बेडर्स नहीं है। हम लोग को मजबूर कर दिया गया स्टूल उठाने के लिए। सबके लिए एक ही गोली होती है। पहले हमारे बाप, पहले हमारे ग्रैंडफादर्स ने ये सब देखा, पहले वो मरते थे, फिर हमारे जो फादर्स हैं वो मरते, अब हमारे भाई मरते हैं, अब हमारे बच्चे मरते हैं। मतलब अब कितना करें हम, हमारे पास अब नहीं रहा है। What do they expect us to do?
पूरे कश्मीर के जो लड़के हैं वो ऑब्वियसली हमारे भाई है, क्योंकि हम सब अभी सेम बोट में सेल कर रहे हैं। सभी का अभी एक ही मोटिव है कि मतलब हमारी जो डिमांड्स है वो फुलफिल करी जाए। हमारी असल में आइडेंटिटी है क्या? अभी कुछ भी नहीं है हम लोग की आइडेंटिटी। अभी हम खुद की आइडेंटिटी बनाना चाहते हैं।
ऐसा कहाँ पे होता है? स्टूडेंट्स प्रोटेस्ट कर रहे हैं, आप लोग उन पे फायरिंग करोगे, पैलेट्स लगाओगे, मतलब ऐसा कहाँ होता है? स्टूडेंट्स के साथ ऐसा बिहेवियर हमें कौन पे करेगा? मुझे बताइए, हमें कौन पे करेगा? हमें कोई पे नहीं करता। हम लोगों को मजबूर किया गया, क्योंकि एक पीछे जब 100 मरे हम क्यों पीछे हटे? हमें नहीं करनी चाहिए। ये गवर्नमेंट तक है कि वो क्या कर रहे हैं हमारे लिए, हमें बचाने के लिए।
Everyday life is full of hardship and danger. But in this stressful situation, the women of Kashmir have shown an amazing strength and resilience. In the words of Dasgupta, I quote, it is the women who have to ensure that the battles for everyday life continue as normally as possible, even when times are far from normal. It is they who have had to come to terms with the violence, whether it comes from guns of the security forces or bullets of the militants. And once again, it is the women who have had to provide solace to the rest of the household following the loss of a husband or a son or a brother, unquote. The story of Atwas. From WISCOMP, Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace, Sumana Dasgupta reported about Atwas. At a roundtable entitled Breaking the Silence, Women and Kashmir, quote unquote, the delegates from Kashmir requested that WISCOMP facilitate the formation of an all-Kashmiri women's organization named Atwas. In Kashmiri, Atwas means to reach out and to shake hands, quote unquote. Women of all backgrounds like Muslim, Hindu and Sikh have come together out of a common commitment to peace, exhibiting a first real step towards conflict transformation in Kashmir. The Atwas group visited a village in the border district of North Kashmir, where the example of women as both victims and agents is particularly strong. According to reports, this village consists only of 100 to 150 widows whose husbands and sons have been killed or jailed in the conflict. According to Dasgupta, the Atwas group expected the widows to be steeped in sorrow. However, it had been 8 years since the death of her husband, and the widows now identified themselves primarily as survivors. The women of that village had moved from the private to the public space. They go to the relief office and negotiate for assistance, interact with local authorities, collect wood in the jungle, grow maize and work as laborers. The Atwas group has collected and recorded numerous similar stories of Kashmiri women who transform from victims to agents. However, men of a patriarchal society find it difficult to accept that women can successfully manage the household and bear the economic burden in the absence of a man. As a result of this insecurity, women are often pushed back into the traditional roles of wife, nurturer, or mother. And that again depicts the insecurity of masculinity over femininity. Women's organizations in displaced settings. Women in displaced setting who have now become active agents of post-conflict economic recovery of home as well as society have come forward to organize themselves against the evils of conflict. They now feel free to raise their voice against conflict and violence which are directed towards women. These women's organizations have taken various initiatives to address the problems arising from conflicts. This has helped women to work for peace. Conflict often causes fluidity in gender roles, with women getting access to resources that they do not ordinarily have. However, that space is generally not used to secure permanent and lasting gender transformation. For although changing gender roles open avenues for women to escape age-old violence and discrimination directed against them, these changes are highly context-specific. The women that do utilize the window of opportunity need tremendous support to advance the skills they have developed during conflict. Unfortunately, illiteracy and poverty make it virtually impossible for the experience of women to be heard by the international community. Other obstacles to women's organizations and visibility include resistance from husbands, fathers, and communities. Thus, the empowerment or leadership role of women is in post-conflict depends on whether the society permits them to emerge from their traditional roles and responsibilities. Although conflict may break traditional gender roles by leaving women as the heads of household, it also affects women negatively. The empowerment of women as decision makers remain more in theory than in actual practice. Now let us discuss about disruption of gender roles and its negative effects on women in detail. Traditional roles are quite different for men and women in different cultures and ethnic settings. The different role structures largely depend on factors like education, religious and cultural norms, the legal status of women, and the degree of exposure to Western education and culture. Conflict destroys the daily life routines and expectations of women when they are repeatedly displaced from their homes, disrupting their traditional gender roles. When women are displaced from their comfort zone, it increases their vulnerability. Women generally face considerable abuse as their husbands and sons are occupied in fighting and are incapable of supporting their families. It is at this stage that women become most vulnerable with the absence of any family support system. During situations of conflict, women are exposed to extreme conditions such as living in dilapidated conditions, forcibly being made to work with combatants and extremist groups. Women and girls might be seen playing multiple roles such as domestic servants, sexual partners, comfort women, informants for the soldiers. The exposure to such vulnerabilities during displacement leads to heightened cases of trafficking, which involves the kidnapping of women and girls for the intention of transporting them across the border to places where they would be forced to practice sexual slavery. It is heightened because of the poverty that strikes the conflict-ridden area. Women join the armed forces or extremist groups as a way of empowerment to fight back. Quite often, it is also seen that extremist groups force the women to join them under the threat to their lives. Another precarious situation a woman might face is being targeted as a suspect of belonging to a terrorist group. A woman's forced role as provider means that she has to face increased stress as during conflict or in situations of displacement, basic goods are difficult to locate. Her workload increases, she has to work both inside and outside the house. Traditional gender roles are often reinforced in situations of displacement. Women are forced to stay indoors. Their movement is restricted because of the lack of safety outside the four walls of the home. As in Afghanistan, their re-employment opportunities are restricted. Women only find employment in manual household work or have to take recourse to begging. In conclusion, it can be stated that disruption of traditional ways of life during and after conflict does help women to take up new roles. She often becomes the sole earning member. However, since a woman has no choice in the jobs she has to take up, she ends up being exploited. Due to cultural and religious restrictions, lack of education, and lack of security, women are not always able to obtain meaningful employment. Fears of being stigmatized and their inability to speak or be vocal about their exploitation makes it difficult for non-governmental organizations to assist and help them. And yet, according to Hill, women continue to do incredible and amazing things. I quote, "They are sharing information and analysis. They are collecting signatures for petitions. They are organizing demonstrations and campaigns. They are reaching out over borders. They are forming networks. Often they are anticipating early signs of danger and lobbying for ceasefires. Women also participate in less formal peace-building activities such as taking in orphans and assisting in the reintegration of combatants and child soldiers in the community." In Bosnia, women identified the need for mobile medical clinics to go from village to serve health and psychological needs. In Colombia, women risked their lives by marching in the streets for peace. In Albania, women collected weapons. Accordingly, it can be seen that the range of women's activities for peace is incredible. Thank you.